Hello, welcome to another episode of Varsity360. I'm Columbian sports editor Micah, joined once again by Will Denner here at the First Pacific Financial Studio. Thanks again to First Pacific Financial for supporting this show, for supporting high school athletics, and supporting the community at large. So we are here today to play the role of professor. We have some grades to hand out to some of the boys and girls basketball teams that we think overreached their played better than their expectations that we had coming into the season. So we've got some A's, we've got some A minuses, we've got some B pluses, but mostly we want to go more into depth on why some of these teams were able to put together such successful seasons. And so starting with, I think, one of the prime examples of that, we'll start with the boys, and that would be the Skyview boys. Skyview boys, they get an A because coming into the season, I mean, I think we figured it would be a competitive league. Camas, I think, had a lot of attention coming in, but Skyview, I don't think any team has improved throughout the course of the season more than the Storm.
Absolutely. They've only lost, I think, now one game since the first week of January. They corrected things with that. They lost that first game against Camas. They come back last week to beat them in a pretty dominant fashion. And then with, as we're recording this on a Tuesday, they play at Union tonight with a chance to win the outright league title. They've turned it around in a big way, in part because of their experience. They returned 5 starters, and then they also returned Jackson Filler back from the injury this year. They kind of used the month of December to schedule some really tough non-league games, and it seemed like that helped get them to this point. And now also their defense has improved too, as you pointed out. And all things considered, I think they have been one of the real turnaround stories we've seen so far. And they're thinking if they win the league title, and even perhaps if not, that they got what it takes to make a deep postseason run.
Well, I think the top grade of an A is warranted in this case because of the way they put those early season lessons into tangible results. I mean, it's one thing. Anybody can schedule a tough non-league schedule. Everybody can go in December and play teams and kind of get beat up a little bit and say that they'll take those lessons to make progress from those going forward in January and February. But the Storm really did it. Let's go back in the time machine to the turn of the new year when the clock struck midnight on 2023 into 2024. Skyview was 4-6, and like you said, since then they've lost just once. They've wrapped up a share of the league title, which is a huge accomplishment for them. But like you said, the big difference has been defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but I think just when you look at kind of the pieces that they've been able to figure that out, I think, a lot over this past month of the season. I mean, this was a team that was, still somewhat young on experience last year and had some of these pieces, but now that they've added really all 6 or 7 of those guys back into the mix, found kind of what everybody's role is. It's making a huge difference for them down the stretch, and to be, at the top of this league and, year in, year out, always a tough league. It speaks a lot to just what they've been able to do this past month. Yeah,
well, I'll highlight a couple of players. Number one, we talk about the defense, and just to throw a stat out, for the first 10 games of the season when they went 4-6, they were allowing 60.7 points per game. Since then, that has dropped almost 10 points exactly to 50.7 points per game. You profiled Jackson Filler, having that big body in the middle, how important is that to what they can do on defense?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, last year, Malachi Weimer, as a freshman, essentially was their only real big man, asking him to take on a huge load. But with Jackson Filler back, I mean, he's a 6'7" post. He's added a little bit of muscle, and he's a little bit bigger now since he was first starting as a sophomore. To have that along with some athletic guys on the perimeter like Gavin Purdue, Gavin Packer, Javen Fletch, all good defenders. And then pairing that with a great scorer in Damari Collins. They have a lot of versatility, but yeah, I mean, just a lot of guys that can fill their roles, and not everybody needs to be the big scorer every night, but just kind of play, do the little things, and it can go a long way for them.
Well, and that's a perfect segue into Damari Collins, who I wanted to touch on before we move on, in that his scoring average has actually dropped from 24 points per game last year to this year just over 19. But I think anybody would argue that he's a more effective scorer and a more effective player and a more clutch performer. So I think that speaks to the fact that Damari doesn't have to carry the entire scoring load this year, which makes Skyview a more dangerous team.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, I think he's still the most dangerous shooter on their team, but to have guys that can kind of play off him more instead of him kind of having to always have the ball in his hands makes them a more dangerous team.
All right, let's move on. We're going to go down a few classifications to a small school team that's been really impressive this year. Seton Catholic boys, you get an A because Seton, they've gradually improved year after year from their first postseason berth in 2016 to back-to-back regional berths in 2019 to the 2020 district championship game. Then last year was a milestone for the program. They made their first trip to Yakima and the round of 12 in the 1A state tournament. So I think there were some high expectations for Seton Catholic, especially since most of that team last year was they were sophomores, and so you knew they'd be bringing back a lot of experience. But the real X factor has been this exciting freshman that we've talked about a lot. That's Caden Wilson, averaging over 18 points a game. You pair that with experienced players like Brady Angelo, who dropped 30 against Stevenson just over the weekend, and you have a team that just steamrolled through the Trico League.
Yeah, not only Brady Angelo, but then you throw in Rico George is a great guard and can do a lot for them. And Lance Lee, one of my favorite players on that team, just a guy who hustles, he can play defense, he can score when he needs to. All in all, a really interesting team, and they are so well positioned for the future as well. When you look at both Caden Wilson being only a freshman and this junior class still having one more year left to grow, and really impressive for them to run through the Trico League. I mean, it's kind of a changing of the guard this year in that league. I mean, Kingsway Christian more recently had been kind of the team to beat. La Center had put together some good runs, and for Seton Catholic to run through this and to clinch it at Stevenson, which can be a tough place to play sometime, really impressive for the Cougars.
I think with Seton, you've seen, and this is indicative of a young team, you've seen that confidence grow throughout the year. You saw them in the non-league season against Evergreen, right?
That's right.
What sort of difference, what's the biggest difference do you think you've seen from that team you saw play a non-league game against Evergreen during a preseason schedule where I think they were kind of 500, maybe trying to figure things out, to the juggernaut that you see in the Trico League right now?
Well, admittedly, I haven't actually seen them play since that game, but just looking at their numbers, I mean, I think the defense has improved mightily. I remember in that Evergreen game that Evergreen was kind of, shooting at will, getting up the court, and Seton unfortunately did not have a whole lot of resistance in that game, but Seton has really cleaned things up, and another for piece of context there, they were without a couple guys in Brady Angelo and Rico George in that game, so obviously that played a factor as well. But they've improved a ton since that opening month of the season, and I think defense is a big part of that as well.
Well, definitely. I mean, they've been excellent on defense in the Trico League, allowing just 50.1 points per game. If you can set that 50-point mark and say, if we can score more than 50, we're going to win.
Yeah,
that's a proposition that I think a lot of teams would take, and more often than not, every time in the Trico League schedule, Seton's been able to do that. Before we move on, Caden Wilson, obviously, he's a very dynamic player. He can shoot, he can break down a defense, can score in the paint. But how important do you think it is for Seton to have that supporting cast like Brady Angelo, like Lance Lee, like Rico George, so that when we get into the postseason here and you come up against teams that are maybe a little bit more stout defensively, that that a team can't just double team and crash on Caden.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah, I remember last year when Jack Jenigas was kind of their top scoring option, and in the opening round of state, they really leaned on a couple guys to get them through, and that overtime win. Brady Angelo was one of them, had a really big game. So all of them will obviously have to play a role, and teams will, I'm sure, be keying in on Caden Wilson come the postseason. But they have 3 other guys, maybe more even, who can get it done for them.
Well, and with pressure comes opportunity, and so I'm very excited to see what Seton Catholic and Caden Wilson do as the stakes get higher and we go into the postseason. Talk about going into the postseason. We'll go up to the 2A boys, and a team that I think emerged from a very competitive and well-balanced league to earn an A- for Columbia River boys. A- only because they came so close. They had an opportunity to knock off Mark Morris and possibly get that league title, but a fabulous season in the 2A Greater St. Helens League for the Columbia River boys. A program with a first-year coach, Mark Ganter, a program with a dynamic guard tandem in Ari Richardson and Aaron Hoey that are just juniors, but then a big solid cadre of supporting a senior class that plays their supporting roles to those 2 guards so well. In finishing second, I think Columbia River really impressed us in that they were the only team to beat Mark Morris during the league season.
Yeah, that was huge, and they did that early in the year. I mean, I remember still opening night when they got a big win against a 4A program in Battleground. They beat Mark Morris just a couple weeks later, I believe, and even though they took losses in the first go-around to the likes of Ridgefield and R.A. Long, they ended up winning both of those games in the second go-around, which I think speaks a lot to just, kind of making those corrections and adjustments and figuring out kind of what they needed to do to get over the hump there. And then when you mentioned the first-year head coach and Mark Ganter, I mean, to have 3 different head coaches in 3 years and kind of still be a little bit in the shadow of David Long, who was there for such a long time, I think is really impressive, both for the coaching staff and this group of players to just kind of adjust year in, year out, and they put all their pieces together going into the postseason.
It's their first league title they were the last time they won a league title was 2019, 2020. They come up just short this time, but this is a team that I think is going to be really interesting for me to see how they go through the district and hopefully, if you're a Rapids fan, ultimately the state tournament. And in that, I think with that guard tandem, we're coming off a game in the regular season finale where Ari Richardson dropped 28 points, and Aaron Hoey is possibly one of the best pure shooters that Columbia River has had in a while there. So what do you think the ceiling is for that team in the postseason?
Oh, I mean, I think they absolutely have a chance to make the state tournament, and to get, I believe there are 4 berths out of District 4 in that 2A district tournament, and with the EVCO 2A kind of being a little bit weaker this year up north, I think River has a great shot of getting through, and depending on what their placement would be for a opening round of state, who knows? I mean, and also, I mean, when we talk about those guards, and like you said, I mean, they have a really nice kind of supporting cast of seniors as well, and different guys, kind of repeating here, but almost like that Skyview team of just like different guys who can fill it up for them, but also just a lot of length, a lot of versatility, and guys who can defend. Really an interesting team, and I think we're all excited to see how that translates to the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, just to put these kids' names into the record here: Miles Fitzwilson, Adam Reeder, Carter Sharon, Nico Valdez, all seniors, all contribute in many ways. Sometimes you'll see like a Miles Fitzwilson score in double figures, or Nico Valdez get double figures in rebounds. But then other times it's what they do defensively that really makes the difference.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, and the final boys team that we're going to give an exceptional grade here to is the Evergreen boys, and they get a B+ for us because while they've taken a few lumps and ultimately fell short in a game last night against Kelso to decide the league title, I don't think many teams in the area have shown as much grit as the Plainsmen have. The Plainsmen went a few games without leading scorer Des Daniel, who hurt his knee but came back. They were also without Arthur Ban, who's one of the more dynamic players, both on a rebounding and above the rim type of setting. But the Plainsmen just kept finding a way. They are 5-1 in games decided by 6 points or less, including 3 of their 6 wins in the 3A Greater St. Helens League. So therefore, the resume for Evergreen might be maybe not the most eye-popping, in that you say, well, they didn't win the league title, and we're not sure how the 3A Greater St. Helens League maybe stacks up to some of the other stronger leagues around the state. But as far as making the most with what they have and coming through in close situations, I think you need to tip your hat to Evergreen.
Absolutely. And, of course, they were disappointed not to win the league title last night. But I think, like you said, just to be able to win so many of those close games, and, the ones they really needed in the league, starting with that first win against Kelso when they played much of the second half without Des Daniel. And they were also without Fox Crater, who was playing in the All-American Bowl as a football player, the Oregon-bound offensive tackle. And then also, to get those wins against Prairie, both of those were within 4 points. And, a team that I think we said from the beginning of the year had some really kind of interesting, a mix of, kind of the younger guys like Des Daniel and guys who can light it up from the perimeter, but then also having this great, kind of inside presence between Fox Crater and Arthur Ban, and kind of, being one of the bigger teams that they've had in recent years. So ultimately it didn't translate to a league title, but they'll still get a home game in the first round of the 3A bi-district tournament. It'll be a loser out game, but they're back in the postseason after missing out last year, and that's an accomplishment. And to do it like they have this season without, being at less than full strength for a lot of it still is impressive.
Well, and I think they're a tough matchup too, because of that size that you mentioned, and the outside scoring ability, and the strength and athleticism down on the blocks. I think they're a team that, depending on who they match up against, if they get a favorable matchup against someone in the bi-district tournament, Evergreen could get hot, and who knows?
And they've done that before. And another thing too is, even like going back to last night's game when they were in foul trouble, they have a lot of guys that they're willing to throw in there. I think they played, I want to say, like 11 or 12 guys last night. So a lot of different lineups can work for them, and they're not afraid to throw different guys out there. So yeah, in the postseason, I think they've shown in the past that they can make a run, and this team definitely has some of those pieces.
All right. Well, let's move on to some girls programs that we think really exceeded our expectations, although probably they didn't exceed their own expectations, because a few of these I know brought some pretty lofty goals into the year. And one of those is the defending league champions in the 2A GSHL, Columbia River. They get an A, not because they merely repeated as league champions. I think they would say, well, yeah, we want to keep the standards high around here, but it's because of again, the way they did it. They're doing it with just 3 seniors, and their key players. You look at sophomore Gracie Glavin, you have junior Marley Myers. One of those seniors, Emma Iniguez, is a great player, but first year coach and T. Anderson. It's I think Columbia River, the way they were able to handle their business in the 2A Greater St. Helens League, and being the only team this year to beat a very strong Ridgefield team, and they did it twice.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for them to win back-to-back league titles, I mean, last year it was a big story because they hadn't won many in the past 20 years. But for them to do it with a first-year head coach, and, they did graduate some key players last year. I think they still had the core back with Emma Iniguez and Gracie Glavin, Peyton Dukes, Marley Myers, Paige Johnson's a great defensive player for them. And it was impressive to see what they did last week against Ridgefield to win that league title, a really back and forth game. And they had to go up to Ridgefield and play that game in a loud environment. And weren't rattled when Ridgefield made their runs. And I think it's just impressive to see, again, them do it with the first-year head coach, and coming off of that great year last year when they made the opening round of state to rise to the top in a pretty competitive league as well is really impressive stuff.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about the job that Coach Anderson has done there, because the seeds of this recent success were really sown by Jesse Norris, who, like you mentioned, got that team to the mountaintop last year, got them to state, and then takes the job coaching the women's team at Clark College. So T. Anderson comes in, she's got her own style. Every coach does that's a little bit different from their predecessor, but I get the sense she's really kind of taken some of the values and some of the talent that was instilled by Coach Norris and just enhanced it.
Absolutely, especially on the defensive side. I mean, that was really their calling card last year, and it seems like they still maintain that identity in a pretty major way. And then, they just play hard, and I think, hearing about, from earlier in the year when we reported on them a little bit, like it seems like T. Anderson really, wants them to practice hard and then apply it to the game, and it seems like they really do that for the most part. It's kind of like, it's a good way to say it. They've really kind of enhanced what Jesse Norris first started, and much of this same group has now carried it forward with a new head coach.
Well, the numbers don't lie. I mean, you talk about their defense. That's where the Rapids have really shined. They've allowed 50 points or fewer in 11 of their last 12 games going into the postseason. So that has them, aiming for their second state appearance since 2016 when they made the regionals as a 3A team.
Yeah, that's impressive.
So yeah, it really, great season for the Rapids. Hopefully they can keep that going in the postseason. And speaking of postseason, we have another A grade to give to a team that has just yesterday ended one of the longer droughts of league titles, and that would be the Mountain View girls. You get an A for getting a share of your first league title since 1998. What a job by that coaching staff and that roster there at Mountain View.
Yeah, that's impressive. I mean, they to have that long of a drought. First of all, I mean, we talked last year too about how Evergreen won their first league title since 1980, and a lot of that is just because of what a buzzsaw Prairie was for so long, and even Mountain View having some good teams that wasn't able to win the league title. But this year they come out of the gate really hot. Nina Peterson, obviously their leading scorer. They add both Layla and Jadlyn Sanderson, both transfers from Union, and then have a great freshman point guard, Miley Thompson, and really just again start out really fast. It carried them. The way the 3A Greater St. Helens League goes, they start league games from the very start, and Mountain View really kind of built themselves some early momentum in doing that. And even though suffered a league loss or two down the stretch, still did enough to get it done, and they have put themselves in a good spot. They will now play Evergreen tonight. Obviously, that result will be final by the time this comes out, but they're in the postseason, and huge turnaround for that program under Dan Larson.
Well, I think that fast start was so key to a program like Mountain View, especially considering that they went 0-8 in league play last year.
Yeah.
And so, to get that early confidence, start the season 10-1. It's one thing if you mentioned they got that early win in league play against Evergreen, and maybe you start off 3-0, 4-0, 4-1, but when you're trying to build something and then you're over a month in and you look at the standings like, hey, we're 10-1, right? Maybe what we're doing is working here.
Yeah.
And so, and then you look at, they've had a few, they took a few lumps here in the league season, but really they don't have what I would call a bad loss. Their most lopsided losses are number one to a legitimate statewide Class B power in Rainier, and then to an Evergreen that, an Evergreen team that you shared the league title with and can get hot. When they're hot, they're one of the most dangerous teams in the area. And so, obviously, the resume speaks for itself for Mountain View.
For sure. And I think, that's a good point, too, about that start, too. I think sometimes when you go into a season and you feel like you might have a good team on your hands, and a group has been working so hard during an off season to see those early results, I think can really reinforce a lot of the things that you're working toward, and Mountain View got that. And it seems like that only built their confidence as the season went on.
Definitely. Another team that should not be lacking for confidence considering what they did in the 1A Trico League is Seton Catholic. Another A grade for the Cougars. Guess what, Seton boys, Seton girls, you swept the report card here because it's just been a great season for both the boys and the girls programs there at Seton Catholic. But you could argue that this is sort of a down year for the Trico, but Seton can't control that. They've just played whoever has been in front of them, and they've dominated whoever has been in front of them. Some of these points allowed numbers on defense are just ridiculous. I mean, they're giving up like what they outscored opponents by an average of 56-25 in league play. Yeah. They have a couple of wins where they only allowed like 16 points, a couple in the low 20s. You saw them play Kingsway, a team that we thought would be, kind of one of the better rivals in the league this year for Seton Catholic. And what did Seton Catholic do to shut down a team like that on defense so well?
Yeah, I mean, just all over the court. I mean, they have, first of all, great size with Riley Seamer, one of the taller players in the league. And not only that, but just a really kind of scrappy group of perimeter defenders, too. They have a couple players like Alyssa Mancuso and CJ Moore, who also played on Seton's soccer team, and just kind of gritty defensive players. But then they also have the shooting, the Remy Jenigas type, and Madison Lee, a point guard who replaced Anna Mooney, who was so big for them last year. So defensively, it's those numbers are ridiculous. It's kind of hard to believe, and it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out when they go into the district tournament now and how that translates. But overall, just a really impressive run for the Cougars. And even though the Trico League may have been down, just really impressive for them to come out the way they did.
Well, I think it's an interesting juxtaposition with the team we just previously profiled in Mountain View, how they started hot and that really set the tone, and that they've carried that through. It was a little bit of the opposite for Seton. I think that's because they have 9 sophomores, and it was always going to be kind of a work in progress. They started the season 2-4, but they've used those, and Coach Joe Potter, I think, has been very successful in being able to use those kind of early season lessons to take into the Trico. And then once they strung a few wins together and started really clamping down on defense, this team is playing with as much confidence as any going into that district tournament.
And they played some bigger schools in that opening month of the season, and they weren't afraid to go out and schedule some tougher games, and maybe knowing that ultimately what counted was those Trico League games. But yeah, I mean, it seemed like they were just patient this year from the get-go. At least the coaching staff was, and they weren't all overly concerned about maybe what their record looked like going into the new year, and their players bought into kind of what that slow progression would look like, and it really paid off for them in the Trico League, and a team with 9 sophomores that's really growing up in a hurry now.
Well, and I don't think there was any second guessing. You knew what you had done recently had worked. I mean, they were 20-4 last year.
Exactly.
And they made it to the state opening round for the first time in program history. So you didn't have to look that far into the rearview mirror to see, hey, we've had success here. We may be a little young, but we have a blueprint to get pretty far here. Yeah. And I think they've implemented that and just embraced the philosophy. And you're just seeing that, especially with the buy-in on the defensive side.
And a lot of those players were part of last year's team as freshmen. And, while most of them didn't see significant playing time to be along for that ride, I think, they were ready going into this year to kind of lead the team, and the results, while they didn't come right away necessarily, they have translated at the most important point in the season.
All right, on to our next grade, Ridgefield girls. You get an A-, and it's an A- only because there was one team that you were 17-0, perfect against all teams not named Columbia River, but that doesn't take any. I mean, we talked about just how dangerous a team Columbia River is, so that doesn't take anything away from what the Spudders were able to accomplish this year. Very solid season. And what has impressed me most about what Ridgefield has established there is that, we're kind of used to Ridgefield. Okay, they're a great volleyball program, good football program, great softball program, great, girls basketball was always kind of like the one program that was trying to figure things out. You don't have to go that long ago. In 2019, 2020, the Spudders were 1-11 in league play, but boy, they've really figured things out under Lauren Heflin. Great to see Ridgefield put it together this year and play with so much success with the Chapman sisters really leading the way in the backcourt.
Oh yeah, huge. They had a few different head coaches over the years. Now they have Lauren Heflin in her second year, and between the Chapman sisters, both were, even in that Columbia River game most recently, both were among the top scorers. But then they have a sophomore guard in Savannah Chanda who's come along really nicely this year. Elizabeth Swift is kind of one of their senior leaders. Morgan Good as well, and then some other players off the bench who are key for them. And they didn't necessarily play the most, I would say, difficult schedule this year, and part of that was due to weather as well. They lost a couple games that they weren't able to reschedule, but they opened the season with wins against Prairie and Skyview, and then pretty much go right into league play. Ran the table in all of those, like you said, except for the Columbia River losses. So it'll be interesting to see now when they go into the district tournament, kind of how that translates. But with the games they played in league, they were aside from those river games, perfect pretty much.
Well, and that backcourt is going to be dangerous. Beyond this year, Jaleese Chapman, only a freshman as a point guard. Janessa Chapman, a junior, so she'll be back. And then you mentioned Savakanda. So when you bring back that experience and that talent in the backcourt, you can do a lot of things.
Yeah, and they were kind of in years past, or even this most recent season, kind of right in the middle of this league. But now finishing second, they'll have a good draw, you would think, to start the district tournament and be in good shape to get one of those berths for the next round into the opening round of state. And
they do so, and everything looks like they have, like you said, a pretty good chance. It would be the Spudders' first state berth since 2007.
Wow!
So reestablishing a program that has had a couple of lean years in recent memory, but is back at the forefront. So nothing but a salute to Ridgefield and what they've been able to do there. The final team we're going to give a grade to, and it's not really a grade because I would even put it as an incomplete now. Everything that the Camas girls are going to judge this season on depends on the final exam. It is all or nothing with this team because this is a team that is basically state championship or bust. They got so close last year, losing to Eastlake in the championship game. They bring basically everybody back from that team, all the starters, all the key players. You have players like Reagan Jameson, who missed a bunch last year with an injury. You have Addison Harris playing as well as she has. You have Kira Thompson being the ultimate floor general there. We will give our grade to the Camas girls after the state tournament because it's an A+ or nothing for them. Yeah, absolutely. And, this is kind of what we all expected, after the way last season ended, and they've been very open about kind of their unfinished business to take care of this year. But so far, they've really done everything that's been asked of them. I mean, after they go to Spokane and Washington, D.C. for some tough early season tournaments, all they've done are really win the biggest games against, both in-state and out-state. When you look at, their rematch against Eastlake, they win that rematch of last year's state championship game. Then they beat Clackamas in the rematch of a game they lost earlier in the year. They beat Garfield, the 3-time 3A defending state championship in a really tough game on MLK Day. They win that in overtime. Then they beat Union twice, considered really their biggest rival in the 4A Greater St. Helens League, and they blow them out both times and have now won 8 straight. So really everything that they're on course to do what they want to do. But like you said, the biggest thing, it all leads to that final state tournament game. So we will look forward to that and see where they stack up at the end of the year. But until then, they've done everything they can, really. Yeah, I mean, they wanted to go out and not just stack their schedule over the holidays and in the non-league season with tough opponents. They wanted to seek out the best. You're talking like top 10 nationally ranked teams. And so I think it was always part of the plan to go and test yourself against that level of competition. Use that to hopefully, take a new approach and a new standard into the state tournament where you're not going to be fazed by anybody at that point. And I think, we had talked last week about how we're looking forward to round 2 of Union versus Camas, especially considering last year how Union played Camas a lot tougher the second round. And we thought there might be a similar thing happening this year, but no, Camas just dominated from the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, it was on that senior night game, and I think emotions were just really running high, and Camas came out and really just put on, yet another really convincing performance. And, they have been really challenged, obviously, by that non-league schedule. Obviously, it hasn't helped their RPI so far. There's been
which I think is hilarious. I think it's hilarious when you look at that. It's like, number 15 Camas versus a team that's ranked like number 3, and Camas ends up winning by 30.
Right. I mean, there are some gripes about that, and obviously there's a human element as well that will be sorted out. I don't think anybody doubts that Camas is one of, if not the best 4A team, and they should hopefully be seated as such come by district and state. But overall though, I mean, they've been tested against really some of the toughest teams in the entire country, and you do that expecting that it's going to help you down the line, and even if you take those losses, you're ultimately learning and gaining experience that's going to help you in those end of the season games at the Tacoma Dome.
Well, and they're so balanced too. I mean, you look at Addison Harris. Yeah, I think she went off for 28 in a recent game, but she doesn't always carry the scoring load, nor does she even have to. I mean, they spread it around so well.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this, time and time again, just about how unselfish they are. And, Addison Harris could probably score 30 a game if she wanted to, but it's probably not what's best for the team. And, they have so many capable players who can do it otherwise. And, she, probably is the most complete and dangerous offensive player they have. I mean, when you look at Reagan Jamison and Riley Sands and Sophie Buzzard, who's a great shooter, and Parker Mayers and Kendall Mayers off the bench, and combining that with Kira Thompson, obviously, really just a perfectly built team, really, when you look at their starting 5 and some of their top players off the bench.
Well, we are headed into the postseason. We might not be able to put a cap on the grade for Camas until the end of the state playoffs, but for some of these other teams, success in the district tournament, success in the bi-district tournament, making it to state, getting a run through, the regional round, that will define success for them. Every team kind of has a different benchmark that they're trying to hit. It's the most exciting time of the year. It's postseason basketball. We can't wait. Follow us on 360preps.com, and we will see you next week.